on Brandon House Live at worldviewtube.com. Tell your family and friends. Talk to you then. Till next time at Brandon House. May God save America. Take care.
You are watching Worldview 2, built on the 35 years of Worldview books, documentaries,
Colonel Rob Maness has a lifelong record of providing dedicated service to this nation. Having worked his way up from the enlisted ranks to full colonel, he served our country for more than 32 years. He has served as a bomber squadron commander, bomb disposal technician, Joint Chiefs of Staff operations officer, assisted the national security team with the campaign plan for the global war on terrorism. He authored the first theater nuclear war plan, and served as the vice commander of America's largest airborne intelligence wing. Colonel Rob Maness is a true American hero. This is Rob Maness Live.
The Reconciliation Monument. It has been returned to Arlington National Cemetery following its removal in 2023. This is a Confederate monument. Many suggest it was designed and put in place to symbolize the reconciliation after the Civil War. It was taken away, as I mentioned, several years ago. Why was it important for you to bring that back to Arlington National Cemetery?
Because we recognize our history. We don't erase it, Will. We don't follow the woke lemmings off the cliff that want to tear down statues. We look at and learn from our history, all aspects of it. And so Arlington deserves to have, and we're grateful to the state of Virginia for partnering with us. It wasn't easy. We fought to make it happen. And the Reconciliation Monument will return to Arlington where it belongs, to recognize the service of Americans of all chapters. So we're not tearing stuff down. We're done with that. We're putting statues back. We're putting paintings back. We're recognizing our history. We're restoring the names of bases as we've done across the country, because we're proud of our history. As difficult as it may have been in some chapters, we're going to teach it, we're going to live it, and we're going to fight for it.
Okay, you heard me mention at the top of the show, Mr. Secretary, today is...
Welcome back to More War Mondays. The Rob Maness Show's live on Worldview Tube and our X Spaces simulcast while defending American history and our country's reconciliation from that unpleasantness in the 1860s that some call, in these parts, the war between the states. Well, the liberals are devolving into a fit of hysteria over Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth's decision to reinstall the memorial known as the Reconciliation Monument, or the Confederate Memorial, in Arlington National Cemetery that was removed in 2023. But that narrative misses the point and risks erasing a critical moment in our nation's past. Restoring the Reconciliation Monument isn't about romanticizing the Confederacy. It's about preserving a complex chapter of American history, fostering true national unity, rejecting the impulse to sanitize our story. Far from wrong, this move is a principled stand against historical amnesia. It was erected in 1914. The Reconciliation Monument was commissioned as a deliberate symbol of healing after the Civil War. President William Howard Taft approved its placement in Arlington, where nearly 500 Confederate soldiers, sailors, and civilians are buried in what's known as Section 16. Its designer, Moses Jacob Ezekiel, was a Jewish Confederate veteran, intended it to represent the reunification of a divided nation. The frieze on the memorial depicts scenes of Southern life, including black figures, which detractors interpret as glorifying slavery. Well, my guest today is one of the litigants in the court case who took Secretary of Defense Loyd Austin to court to first stop and now restore the monument. Retired U.S. Army Lieutenant Colonel Ed Kennedy Jr. enlisted in the Army in 1971 as an infantryman. He graduated from the United States Military Academy in 1976 and retired in 1997. As an infantry officer, he held a variety of command and staff positions, ending his active duty career as an assistant professor in the history department of the U.S. Command and General Staff College of the Army. Ed, welcome to the Rob Maness Show, sir.
Thank you, sir, for having me.
We appreciate your time today, but I think this is well worth the hour. I've done several shows on taking down statues, not just of Confederates, but of George Washington, Thomas Jefferson, even Abraham Lincoln. But this one to me, as a son of both Union and Confederate ancestry, is very important to me, especially how I learned about it was when I was walking through Arlington Cemetery. I had been to visit a friend's grave early in my career, and someone asked me to go up to Section 16, and I found out about it, and I was amazed at not just the dedication of the people that fought each other in this country to bring this to fruition, but of a country that would allow itself to be reconciled to each other after we killed 600,000 Americans when you tally up both sides. It's amazing. Now, you're a history professor, and I want to talk today about a lot of things, but one of the things I want to talk about is this guy named Ty Sedgwill, which we'll get to in a little bit, because he was the deputy of the renaming commission that actually broke the law and went into Arlington and destroyed this monument and removed it. But first, how did you become a history professor at the Army Command and General Staff College after having spent a career in the Army?
Well, it was my terminal assignment, and I had already taught tactics in the tactics department, and our boss there later became a brigadier general, Stan Cherry, knew that a bunch of us were interested in history, and he said, I'm going to get a C-130 and we're going to fly up to Little Bighorn, and we're going to do a 3-day battle study of the campaigns, the Sioux War campaigns. And that hooked me, and I said, if I have a choice on where I go for my terminal assignment in the Army, I want to go back and teach history, because that's what I like to do, is walk on the battlefields. So after I finished an assignment at Osan Air Base in Korea, my time in the Army was up. I didn't have any potential to go on and do great things. So I asked them if I could go back, and they said, sure. I had a degree in history, which is required to teach there. And I went back and finished my career doing what I love to do, taking people to battlefields and studying battles. So that's how I got there. The former director of the department had been my history instructor at the Staff College, Colonel Swain, and he got a recommendation put in for me and brought me back. So I did what I loved doing until the day I retired in 1997.
Well, we appreciate your service, sir, and we appreciate you carrying on Now, you said you had a history degree. Did you get that from West Point when you graduated from West Point? Is that what your major was?
No, back then you only had one major. This before they got into all this liberal arts stuff. Everyone came out with a Bachelor of Science in engineering, and an engineering professor said, "Don't remind me never to drive over a bridge you design." So I loved history there. I liked studying the history. I didn't do too well in the engineering stuff, so I went to what I loved to do and I did okay in, and that's history. So I got the history degree at the Army Command and General Staff College. It's like the Air Staff College. You can get a additional degree. You have to take extra courses and write a thesis, and that's what I did.
Yeah, I got mine in operational art, some nebulous term out of Air Command and Staff College. When you took history at West Point, though, and I have a target that I'm looking at, but when you took history at West Point, what did they teach about the war between the states, the Civil War, the Southern leadership, and those kind of things? What was the teaching like there from the perspective of the facts?
Well, this was in the early 70s, and it's very different from now. And the reason I know that is I have a son that graduated in 2008. We had very different experiences. West Point has gone woke, and they're in the process of unwoking it right now. History was taught with an eye on the military aspects, staying away from the politics and trying not to get bogged down into the whys and wherefores of the war's causes. They stuck to the military application. How can we learn from the tactical and operational art that was exercised during the war? Interestingly enough, when I was teaching the foreign students at the Army Command and Staff College, they had a mandatory course they had to take on the war between the states. And the reason I call it that is because my family's from Gulfport, Mississippi. I think you're close by there. But they were not interested in the politics as much as the tactics and operational art. And that's where we stayed when I was a cadet. They got into talking about both sides equally, you know, the good and the bad, but they stayed away from politics. Now it's mired in racial identity politics, which is very sad. They're losing the point on why we study these battles and campaigns. And it's getting into stuff that they don't really need to be talking about in that vein. I mean, there's courses you can take on it, but the point we were looking at as cadets is how can we apply these tactics to today's operational military art? And that's why we studied at that time. They've cut back substantially on history study at West Point, which is a shame. And they've gotten very involved with the politics.
So when you guys studied in your class days at West Point, when you studied a person like Lee or Jackson, it's primarily, actually fully, it sounds like, from a military thinking perspective, you know, at each of their levels as they were actors in the war.
Exactly. We were interested in what animated them to make the decisions they made. You know, what were the force ratios? How did that affect what they did on the battlefield? Were they able to affect the force ratios in a positive way to win, or what happened if they lost? But, you know, we stayed away from the issues of the politics, and it was strictly studying the military application, distances, times, supplies, logistics. How did they make their decisions? What caused them to do what they did? Were they tired? What are the immutables of combat? And that's not what they're teaching today, apparently.
Yeah, and when they named, like one of the barracks is named after Lee, when they named stuff or put portraits up, was it recognizing them as Confederates, or was it recognizing, I mean, most of these guys were West Point graduates, weren't they?
Yes, they were. And the answer is they were looked at as distinguished graduates who did great things during the war. They were respected and venerated. It's about only 10 or 12 years ago, on the front of one of the alumni magazines at West Point, it had a little moniker on there. It says something to the effect, "We teach the history our graduates made," or something like that. Had a picture of Grant and Lee on there. Well, now, of course, Lee is persona non grata. There was a huge portrait of Lee in the library facing a huge portrait of Grant on the other side of the room in the library. And we were taught, you respect these people. They did great things. They were brave, courageous men. Lee served in the U.S. Army for years prior to the war. He did amazing stuff for the U.S. military, Mexican-American War hero. So, you know, we didn't get into this business of, did Grant own slaves? You know, what did he do with his slaves versus what did Lee do with his slaves? You know, that wasn't the interest. The interest was purely military.
Yeah. As a matter of fact, there wasn't even any talk of treason, was there?
Absolutely not. In fact, this has become a very common topic today. People throw the word around treason. I said, great. Define what treason means and tell me how many Confederates were ever tried for treason, and I'll help you along. The answer is 0. Why didn't they try them at that time when there was heated discussions about this? And the answer is pretty simple. The head of the Supreme Court went to President Johnson after Lincoln had been assassinated, and this isn't a Lincoln appointee, and told President Johnson, he said, we do not want to try these people for treason because there is a chance that that secession will be found legal, and therefore treason could not be pegged on them because it's not treason if you're in a different country. So the Chief Justice, Salmon Chase, said, don't do this. And they didn't. They didn't charge any of them with treason. Well, they tried to, but they never brought indictments against them. And no one was ever tried, not a single Confederate. And they knew better than to do it because it would bring constitutional questions up they didn't want to handle.
Exactly. And constitutional questions that to this day haven't been answered yet, Ed. We got to take a commercial break. When we come back, we'll see a little clip about the case, the court case itself. And I want to dive into the case and let you educate this audience on what this case was all about. We'll be right back with retired U.S. Army Lieutenant Colonel and history professor Ed Kennedy.
Been very passionate about saving this monument. Give us the good news.
Well, thank you, Todd. Great to be with you this afternoon. Well, the good news is that we have a temporary restraining order against the Department of Defense from tearing down this monument. It is unconscionable that they would actually do this anyway, but they say they're following what the 2021 National Defense Authorization Act is telling them to do. I firmly disagree with them because removing a monument from Arlington National Cemetery that was put there over 100 years ago to literally commemorate the reconciliation between North and South, between Confederate and Union, and they're calling it a Confederate memorial. It is not. It is a reconciliation memorial. You know, I thought that's what our country was all about, was unity, unification, and that's what they want to destroy. They don't want that. No reconciliation is what the left wants, and they will stop at nothing, even to tearing down the reconciliation monument in Arlington National Cemetery. And fortunately, this judge, a Trump appointee, has issued a temporary restraining order, and we've got a couple more days now to fight this battle out, and I believe that we should win this battle.
Welcome back to the Rob Maness Show, and it's More War Monday. Unfortunately, sometimes we have to talk about the war internally amongst ourselves, and the subject today is about Secretary Pete Hegseth reinstating the Confederate memorial that most people know as the Reconciliation Monument, sculpted and designed by a Jewish Confederate veteran, Ezekiel, or Moses Ezekiel, and that is why we're here today. But that court case that Andrew Clyde was just talking about is one of the things I wanted to dive into, because my guest today is retired U.S. Army Lieutenant Colonel Ed Kennedy, and he is also a history professor from the Command and General Staff College, but one of the litigants for the case. And Ed, I just wanted to take this segment and dive into the elements of this case and let you talk about it and talk about who is Defend Arlington and what was going on with it, what is going on with it, really, still to this day.
Okay. Defend Arlington is a group of people around the country who were sickened by what was happening with the tearing down of our monuments and memorials. And it's not just the Confederate ones. We were just sick about George Washington's memorials and monuments coming down, Benjamin Franklin, President Roosevelt, Lincoln, and the absolute disgrace of letting these thugs go around and tear stuff down. And then, of course, they went after the Confederate memorials and monuments, and that's been on the agenda of the NAACP since 1991. The Black Lives Matter people took up the cudgel, and after George Floyd died of his drug overdose, they somehow illogically connoted that Confederate memorials and Confederate stuff had killed George Floyd. Therefore, they were all racist, and therefore everything had to be torn down. That's just absolutely gross logic. It's what we call post hoc ergo propter hoc illogic. They are attributing stuff that has nothing to do with the memorials. Therefore, it can be tied somehow illogically to the memorials, and we can therefore tear them down. I mean, it's just total ignorance. In their Jacobin frenzy, they went around and destroyed monuments or defaced them, like the one to the famous regiment in Glory. The movie Glory came out about, and one of the first black units to serve in the U.S. Army during the war between the states. It wasn't the first, it was one of the first. And so the 54th Massachusetts was formed in Massachusetts, but the soldiers came from around the Northeast. Very famous unit. And here's the kicker to me. The soldiers, the enlisted soldiers, were all black, but the officers were white. And I don't know why people don't see the incongruity there. They were good enough to serve, but they couldn't be leaders. And then the other thing is, the U.S. Army segregated soldiers from 1863 until 1948, when President Truman issued his Executive Order 9981, integrating the military. So the U.S. Army was practicing racism, but you never hear about that racism being a reason to tear down memorials and monuments to the U.S. Army. If you want to be logical, all those memorials and monuments until 1948 need to come down because they were to a racist military. That's silliness, of course, but I'm just saying that's the logic they use. So we started this group to fight what was going on, and we thought the national level, what is the most important memorial to Confederate soldiers? The memorial. It's not a monument to the Confederacy. A lot of people mislabel that. It's not a monument to the Confederacy. It's a memorial to honor the dead soldiers. And the way this happened is 4 days after the Spanish-American War ended, the last president to have served in the Union Army during the war, President McKinley, stated that, this is 4 days after, in order to bring the country together, he wanted to thank the Southerners for their loyal service in the war. And he thought the best way to do this is to allow Confederate soldiers to be buried in Arlington Cemetery, where they had been banned from being buried since the war between the states. So that started the impetus. Now, sadly, he got assassinated, but the presidents following him took up the yoke on this thing, and they allowed for the Confederate soldiers to be buried in the cemetery. 1901, 1906, Congress passed authorization acts to start burying soldiers who had died in the District of Columbia in North Virginia in that cemetery. So they went around, gathered them up from old soldiers' homes and places around the district and brought them over and put them in the Confederate section. During that same time, the United Daughters of the Confederacy, the daughters of soldiers who had died in the war, in order to remember their fathers and grandfathers, said, we need to put a memorial in there. Let's get a memorial done. And they found Ezekiel, or Moses Ezekiel, the very famous VMI cadet who fought in the war in the Confederate Army. He was a world-renowned sculptor, and they got him to design this beautiful memorial. Now, he's a world-renowned. He had been all over the world. He had been given the title of knight in Italy. he was just a remarkable man, but he designed this as his magnus opus. It was his greatest work. He said, when I die, I wish to be buried at its base. It therefore became his grave marker. Now, a lot of people say, what's a statue? It's a marker. No, it doesn't say what the size has to be. It's his grave marker. He asked to be buried there, and when he was put in the grave, it was at the base of that memorial. So the memorial goes around to being dedicated in 1914. The Grand Army of the Republic, which is run by a former Union soldier, lost both of his legs in the war, is the commander of the National Grand Army of the Republic, which is all the Union veterans. He personally came to the memorial ceremony, the dedication, and he spoke there. And here's what he said. Quote, among my comrades of the battlefield reputation, I am prone to believe there will be but little, if any, opposition expressed. For myself, I have no hesitance at the full mention of the matter in taking my position, especially in view of the fact to be consistent with all I have said or written since the war, I must take this position. And he's talking about reconciliation with his former enemies. I have said since my election as the commander-in-chief that if the position gave me the opportunity to say one extra word or to perform one extra deed, which would be more weight than my word or the deed otherwise would be to work for harmony and good feeling all over the country, then I would rejoice more than otherwise that I was commander-in-chief. Rather than take any other position on this subject, I would lay down my commission. In other words, the commander of all the Union veterans came and said reconciliation was so important, he wanted to make it happen. In addition to that, we had the sons of, well, back then it was United Confederate Veterans, the actual Confederates. Commander of the Confederate Veterans came and spoke. The United Daughters of Confederacy were the ones responsible for putting that memorial up. And like 99.82% of all Confederate memorials, they were all privately funded by donations of pennies, nickels, and dimes during one of the hardest times in our history in the South, when the South was devastated. So I heard this congresswoman in one of the links that I saw got up to testify in front of Congress, and she obviously doesn't know her history. She was kind of spazzing around, and she talks, well, it was done, alluding to the fact it was done way after the war. Yes, how about that? Union memorials weren't put up till way after the war. And the reason is because they had no money to do it. The South was devastated, but it was called the age of memorialization about the time of the turn of the century in the 20th century. That's when all the Union and Confederate memorials were going up. And they used this post hoc, ergo propter hoc analogy saying, well, that's during the time of when we were hanging and lynching blacks and there was great discrimination. Okay, great. Does that mean the memorials to the Union soldiers are involved in that too? Remember, the Union Army was completely segregated. So do they have to be torn down? I mean, this is just stupidity. But these memorials are to soldiers who died in combat. They're not Confederate monuments. They have nothing to do with advocating for the Confederacy and saying slavery is great. It's to honor the service of these men. So the Daughters of the Confederacy paid for this, raising money, doing bake sales, carriage washes. They didn't have car washes, so they raised the money. And it was hard to do back then. And they put the memorial up in 1914, and no one complained. And for over 100 years, it stood there until all of a sudden, because George Floyd died of a drug overdose, they're going to pin it on this Confederate memorial, which no one even knew about. You know, most of the people, and especially Black Lives Matter, had no clue that the memorial existed. In fact, Black Lives Matter defaced the famous 54th Massachusetts Memorial in Boston. They splashed it with red paint and painted BLM on it. And then they went after a very famous World War II general named General Lee down in North Carolina, but he was an airborne general in World War II. But of course, they don't want the facts to get in the way of their emotions. So they defaced his memorial down there, and it was a statue in his World War II uniform. So these dopes are out there doing bad stuff, and they want to make it all about race. So the bad thing is a lot of these people buy into that argument because they don't know their history.
Yeah,
and we got started to counter this. That's why we started Defend Arlington. We filed a lawsuit, and this lawsuit has been going through the court systems. Unfortunately, we've run into some woke judges like Rossi Alston in the district court in Washington, D.C. He broke the law. He broke judicial ethics by going to visit the site at the invitation of the Army after they cleaned it up all night. They went out there, cleaned up all the heavy machinery and said, look, we're not desecrating graves. Well, they pulled up all the plywood matting they put on top of the graves to drive their machinery. Next day, it was pristine because they went out there, and we had pictures of the machinery on top of the graves. So Rossi Alston then blew our lawsuit away and said, can't do it. And so we had to go through another appeals process. And all they were doing is trying to run the clock out on us and cause our expense account to go up, which it's very expensive to do these. So he had a chance to fix it based on the law, and he refused.
Well, we got to take another break, Ed. When we come back, I want to dive into the legal issue that the NDAA that authorized the renaming commission that gave you the opening to get this lawsuit in and see what the status of it is today. We'll be right back with retired Lieutenant Colonel, U.S. Army, Ed Kennedy.
News is moving faster than ever, and so are we. Worldview Tube brings you 24/7 live stream coverage and now real-time alerts when it matters most. Once you have the Worldview Tube app installed, exit the app and navigate your way to Settings. In Settings, locate the tab labeled Notifications. Select the Notifications tab. Scroll down until you locate the Worldview Tube app icon. Select the tab, and here you can turn on and customize your notification experience for the Worldview Tube app. News doesn't wait, and neither should you. Turn on push notifications to stay informed. Every headline as it happens.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I rise to oppose this amendment as well. After the Civil War ended, Robert E. Lee himself argued against the erection of monuments to the Confederacy because he recognized that those monuments, rather than, I invite you to read what he said about proposed monuments in Gettysburg, proposed monuments to Stonewall Jackson. He said they would more likely retard the reunion and binding and reconciliation of the North and South than help it. But many of these monuments, including this one, weren't put up right after the Civil War. They were put up after Reconstruction ended. And during Reconstruction, formerly enslaved people for the first time began to gain social, political, and economic power. And when Reconstruction ended, and the old Confederate power structure came back in the South, three things happened. Through the use of voter suppression, racial terror, and propaganda, efforts were made to say to Black Americans who finally started to gain in the promise of our founding documents, stay in your place. The lost cause narrative was part of that. Many of these monuments were a part of that. And they were put up in response to Reconstruction, in response to the gains of the Civil Rights Movement, and we're in that backlash, frankly, right now. When this monument was placed, the gentleman said it was for reconciliation, but for who? Not for the Black Americans who saw that monument then, and even today, and see the images of a mammy and a loyal slave following his master into battle, and they know what that means. It conjures up the stereotypes that were used to help build the lie of white supremacy. The stereotypes that were used to help convince Black people to stay in their place. And that is part of why the commission said this monument should come down and why this amendment should be defeated.
Welcome back to the Rob Maness Show. It's More War Monday, and we're talking about the reinstallation of the Reconciliation Monument, the Reconciliation Memorial in Arlington Cemetery that was put there as part of a whole process to reunify the country that took decades, well beyond Reconstruction. And as a matter of fact, we still are in the process of doing that today, in spite of the lies you just heard coming from the floor of the House of Representatives from a woman named McClellan from Virginia. As a representative, she's free to lie under the speech and debate clause on the floor of the House of Representatives into the record all she wants, just like I am free to tell the truth or lie. And I want to put the facts out there. So my guest today is retired U.S. Army Lieutenant Colonel Ed Kennedy, who is also a history professor from the Command and General Staff College, and whose family is from Gulfport, Mississippi, where I am sitting right now on the beach at the Gulf of Americas, where my house is, and proudly so. Well, Ed, you know, there's a lot to unpack there, but I just want to make sure for the audience they understand that you pointed out that Ezekiel's grave marker is this statue that he created at his request. And there was something in the National Defense Authorization Act that created this renaming commission that talks about cemeteries, wasn't there, and grave markers?
Yes, sir, absolutely. It said they were not going to go into cemeteries and go after the markers. And of course, that doesn't stop leftists from doing what they want. Let me go back to the naming commission. We call it the shaming commission. It was made up mainly of people who had no history background, except for this guy, Ty Seigel. My former boss at the U.S. Army Command and General Staff College, 1969 graduate of West Point, has a PhD in history. And he blistered this Seigel book that caused this problem with the memorial. Seigel wrote a book called Robert E. Lee and Me. And he just raked him over the coals in the book and said, in the review he wrote, he said, here's a guy that is fronting himself as a brigadier general. He got the rank as a honorific title. He didn't earn it because he was a professor at West Point. Retiring directors of professors of departments are given an honorific rank. And my boss said it's like giving a golden pen to a CEO when he leaves a company. He didn't earn the rank. You know, he's been there at West Point for years and years out of the real Army, and he got the rank. And then he writes a book and says, look, I'm an expert because I'm a professor of history. But his history degree is a master's in World War I history. Not that he can't have an opinion, but it's like my friend said about the book. He said there's no new information in it. He's taken the same old information and he's rehashed it using his opinion to go after Lee and the Arlington Reconciliation Memorial that he specifically targeted in his book. So he recently just published an article, I believe it came out today, in one of the military journals. Ty Seigel came after him with a vengeance. Ty Seigel, for people don't know, is the example of the wokeistas that they're trying to get rid of in the military now. This guy is a prime example. It's important to remember recently, a couple of years ago, we had a cadet graduate from West Point who was an open communist. This happened when Ty Seigel was there. So this is no surprise. Seigel is a leftist. His view of history is tainted. He can have his opinion, but it's it's wrong. It's based on his interpretation, which is very Marxist. He influenced the naming commission. The naming commission gave recommendations to the Secretary of Defense, Lloyd Austin. Now remember, Lloyd Austin was selected by President Biden. So you're starting to see a thread of continuity here. Leftists beget leftists. Lloyd Austin was a cadet at West Point when I was there. I wasn't friends with him. I didn't really know him. But, shame on him. Instead of taking the recommendation, looking at it and studying it, he said, and he could have said, we're not going to take this recommendation because it's inside the cemetery. That's outside the remit given to the naming commission. We're not going to do this. He could have easily said that in dead issue. It wouldn't have happened. Instead, he's just rubber stamped it and said, take it down. And so then we started the legal process. We filed suit, slowed it down. They got in there between Hanukkah and Christmas in 2023, about a year and a half ago, and in the dead of night, took it down. Only took them about 2 days to disassemble it, but they put matting down on graves, drove equipment over it. We caught them in the act. We have people up there that were taking photographs of it as it was being done. And so in our suit, we went after them and said, this is outside the remit. You cannot go after cemeteries and graves and grave markers. And despite the fact you don't like it, doesn't mean that's authorization to take it.
Right.
So we started going through the process. We've been through 2 appeals processes. Judge Rossi Alston in the district, again, broke the law, broke judicial ethics, went in there without our representative. The Army lawyers were there, but they didn't invite our lawyers to go. And they went in and said, poof, look, there's nothing to see here. There's no mess. Well, they'd cleaned it up all night, and so it was pristine. There was no heavy equipment. Nothing was there except the graves. So they said, see, we're not driving on the graves. And of course, Alston then dismissed our suit, and we had to appeal. And we were fixing to go before the Supreme Court. We were going to file to the Supreme Court. And then this miraculous event occurred where Secretary Hegseth came out and said, put it back. We still have a problem. We're not done yet. They've said it will be on loan. Wait a minute. How can you take something that doesn't belong to you and loan it to the Army? Well, what happened is 4 months ago, the Army, under the table in the dead of night with no announcements, gave that memorial to the state of Virginia. They don't own it, but they said, yeah, we'll take it. They had plans to put it on a battlefield where it didn't belong, just so they could have possession of it. So they have it in a storage facility, and now they say it's going to take 2 years to put back what took 2 days to take down. And we have a problem with that because the longer you wait, now we have Congress people making big noises to try to stop it. And it's no surprise that Pocahontas Elizabeth Warren is leading the pack on this. And of course, Ty Seidman wrote his op-ed in the paper yesterday or today, and is trying to get people to stop it. So the fight goes on. It's not over with yet.
Yeah, exactly right. I had my op-ed published at the AMAC News this morning, too, supporting Hegseth's decision and supporting you guys. We got a question from the audience. We have a live audience here. Let's go ahead and take that question real quick before we get to this break. Go ahead, Shell. Shell's our host over there.
We have true MAGA, sir.
Hey, thank you, Colonels. Thanks for your commitment to freedom. Even though you're retired, you're still fighting, and that's awesome. Thanks for speaking up for the unknown soldier. I mean, our society is too sensitive. It's all started with political correctness, I think. And I just want to know what you thought or what you think the founding fathers would think of all this if they could actually see what you've seen lately. I'll end it there. Thank you.
Well, the founding fathers didn't know about Marxism, but I'm sure they would be against it. And this is all part of a Marxist influence and ideology in our country. It started back in the 1840s, really. And it's getting worse because young people don't study the history and they have no respect for the past. And part of Marxism is tear down the past and rename it. There's a Chinese lady who got away from the Red Chinese, came to the United States, wrote a book recently on what happened during Mao's revolution in the 1960s. Same thing went on in China. The Red Guards destroyed the culture of traditional China. They burned, looted, tore up, killed people, murdered. Millions of people died during the Cultural Revolution. And that's the same kind of thing we're facing here. These people that do this, like Black Lives Matter and Antifa, have no respect for our history and our past. Memorials to dead soldiers, I don't care if it's German in Germany, and I served 6 years, I lived in Germany 6 years, and I have German army friends. They didn't memorialize Nazism, but they had fathers and relatives who died in the war, and out of respect for their sacrifice, their lives, they put up memorials to honor their lives. And that's what we're doing here. It's the same for World War I, World War II soldiers. And I haven't seen any of these self-righteous people like Representative McClellan say, let's tear down the World War I U.S. memorials and the World War II because the Army was segregated, therefore we were celebrating segregation. And that's a stupid argument, but that is really the logic they're using with the Confederate memorials. They're nothing more than remembering the soldiers who lived and died.
Yeah, exactly right, Ed. We got to take one more break. When we come back, I want to keep diving into this. You know, General Grant was the head of the U.S. Army and later president of the United States. Nobody wants to tear his stuff down, that I know of anyway, but they have gone after George Washington, Thomas Jefferson, and many, many others. And that gets to Ty Seigel's lack of solid logic in his arguments. It can't be just about white supremacy from the perspective of the southern states that became the Confederacy, because as Ed has pointed out, rightly so, throughout this show, that was a problem from before the inception of this country. And we fought this war that ended up ending slavery, but it didn't end that concept in people's minds. And we all have to stand together, reconciled and reunified in order to firmly eliminate that concept that people are better than the other just because of the color of their skin. It's ridiculous to us now, but it wasn't then, and it was across this country, not just in the South. We'll be right back with retired U.S. Army Lieutenant Colonel Ed Kennedy.
You woke up with a sore throat and a low-grade fever. You know you are getting sick, so here's your choices. You can get sicker and miss work, try to see a doctor this week, or sit hours in a crowded waiting room at urgent care.
I have a smarter option for you. Open your medical emergency kit. Match your symptoms to doctor-recommended prescription in your booklet and take the right meds now and get well faster.
This is not a first aid kit. It's like having an urgent care in your home. It includes doctor-prescribed medications to treat over 39 medical issues like respiratory infections, strep throat, pneumonia, UTIs, and more.
No waiting to see the doctor and no standing in line at the pharmacy. It's right here.
Every home should have at least one medical emergency kit, and here's how to order.
Go to worldviewhealthcare.com. Your kit to treat dozens of common and serious illnesses is rushed to your door. worldviewhealthcare.com. That's worldviewhealthcare.com.
The emergency kit available at worldviewhealthcare.com. Make sure you don't have to go to urgent care. I got pneumonia. I didn't have to go. I took this last year. Stayed at home. Went to bed.
The latest skirmish in the battle over Confederate statues and symbols taking place in Norfolk, Virginia. Workers took down the statue of a Confederate soldier that had stood in a city square since 1907. It's one of some 1,700 monuments in question. Here's ABC's Marcus Moore.
Tonight, the battle over symbols of the Confederacy sweeping the country.
Out of an abundance of caution, we are taking down the statue.
Crews today pulling a Confederate soldier nicknamed Johnny Reb to the ground. The statue standing high above Norfolk for more than a century. Also in Virginia this week, protesters taking a sledgehammer to the head of this Confederate monument. Another symbol of division, Christopher Columbus. Statues of him vandalized in Miami, even beheaded in Boston, targeted over the explorer's treatment of indigenous people. while others see them as a part of history that should be preserved.
History is important for us, for our kids. They will know why we are here.
Across the country, more than 1,700 Confederate symbols still stand. In Houston, the mayor announcing he'll relocate these Confederate statues to commemorate Juneteenth, the holiday marking the end of slavery in America. Jacksonville going one step further, ordering all Confederate statues removed.
I understand the anger and frustration, okay? I hear you and I'm going to walk with you.
This as the fight over renaming military bases named for Confederate soldiers continues. The president dismissing the idea, but some Republicans breaking ranks.
If you want to continue naming forts after soldiers, there have been a lot of great soldiers that have come along since the Civil War.
Tom, here in Dallas, city officials are asking a court for permission to remove the monument you see behind me. They want to have it stored and preserved in storage, saying that it is, quote, a glorification of racism.
Welcome back to the Rob Maness Show on Worldview Tube, and we're live right now. And we're talking, and it's More War Monday, and we're talking about the war on American history, the war on Americans who fought and died for their country with honorable service, with retired U.S. Army Lieutenant Colonel Ed Kennedy, who's a professor of history at the Army's Command and General Staff College for many years, as an officer and afterwards. And Ed, I wanted to talk in this segment about why this case is still important. It can't be moot because we have far to go to make sure that the reconciliation memorial is put back in place where it's supposed to be as Ezekiel's grave marker, and those other Confederate soldiers and civilians in Section 16. It's their grave marker, too. I'll just go ahead and say it. But this is a much bigger problem. And the interesting thing you'll notice about these videos is they're old because nobody wants to cover this. Nobody wants to cover this in any type of corporate media because they don't understand the history of our country. They don't want to defend their ancestors if they have ancestors. And I'm doing this and have done these shows in honor of my great-grandmother who told me when I was a boy about the pennies she collected for the UDC, the United Daughters of the Confederacy, to put statues and memorials up to the honored dead. And that's why I'm doing it, because I'm honoring her and her father, who was a Confederate soldier. And my father's father's father was also a Confederate soldier. And my mother's father's grandfather was a Union soldier. So I think we should honor their service and their sacrifice, especially the ones that died in service to their country. And we have to honor that history in order to do a couple things. Number one is so we're not doomed to repeat it, right?
One of the things that you said that really strikes me is the people that are criticizing on these monuments and memorials, criticize it on the basis of race. How about this? How about those memorials and monuments also stand for the black soldiers who served in the Confederate service? And there's tons of them. Distinguished Professor Edward C. Smith just recently passed away. He taught at American University, did an extensive study, and he started back in the 1990s, early 1990s, figuring out how many Confederate soldiers were black. And he came to incredible numbers that he speculates. Now, the bad news is a lot of the records have disappeared. The records were burned as the Northern armies went through the capitals of the South and put them to torch. But there are a number of records that are still extant today. I have a friend of mine that lives in Jackson, Mississippi, who wrote a great book about his ancestor. It's called Orderly for Lee. Now, until about 2007, Al Arnold would have nothing to do with Confederates. He didn't like the battle flag because he had been taught by his friends that the battle flag had to be racist. And he learned all of a sudden at his grandmother's house, the photograph on the wall of this elderly man wearing a number of medals on his jacket was his great-grandfather Turner, who was a Confederate veteran and was honored by the Confederates. He was wearing all the reunion medals. He went to all the reunions. He was buried as an honored member of the community he lived in, and he was buried by his Confederate veteran friends, mostly white. Al Arnold changed his view completely, 180-degree turn, because he learned that he also had Confederate ancestors. A friend of mine, Peggy Towns, in Decatur, Alabama, wrote a book. She served in the Alabama legislature for years. She's retired now. Wrote a book called Duty Driven. And she tells a fascinating story in her book of her genealogy. She said, I wanted to learn all about my Union Army ancestors. And so she started doing the genealogical research. And boom, guess what? She had them on both sides. She had Confederates and Union Army ancestors.
Yeah.
And she said, be careful what you look for, because you may find something that makes you uncomfortable. She says, you know, they are my ancestors. What do I say? And they are Confederates. So, you know, what about the black people? I always ask them, what about the black people whose ancestors served honorably for the Confederacy? One of the members of our Sons of Confederate veteran camp in Leavenworth, Kansas, I recruited years ago. He still lives up there, Tyrone Williams. A very, very great man. He's a 6.5 foot tall retired federal marshal, and he has a black ancestor, and he found it doing genealogy. And he said, would you help me get the headstone, the VA headstone, and put it on his grave in Arkansas? And I said, absolutely, I would do that. I said, as long as we go in the wintertime, there's no snakes and mosquitoes, I'll be glad to. So we went down in January of 2006. I've got a great photograph of him with his little Confederate flag on the grave of his ancestor. He's very proud of him. So my question is, what about the black soldiers? They're being disrespected when these monuments and memorials are torn down too. And it's to them as well. They sacrificed as well.
Ed, what do you say about the people like Sigel who say, well, those were slaves that were being loyal to their masters and being made to go into service? I hear that all the time.
Some were. I don't argue that fact. Some were. Okay. But there's enough records showing that many of them volunteered to go with their masters. They weren't told to go. They volunteered to go. And then there were a number of freed slaves that went. Nathan Forrest had 45 slaves on his plantation. He said, we're going away to war. If anyone comes with me, I will give you your freedom. Every single one of them signed up. And in a year before the war ended, he gave them their papers and said, men, I may be killed in combat, and I don't want somebody going back on this. Here are your freedom papers. And they stuck with him. One was captured, one was killed during the war. Now, a lot of people say, well, they weren't really soldiers. Really? Look up the definition of what a soldier is. Nothing says they have to be signed on a piece of paper. They have to be combatants or support the combatants. And a lot of historians, even historians, they're civilians, don't get this. In the military, we have combat arms, combat support, and then we have the combat service support, which are the people that send the bullets and beams to the front so the combat arms guys can shoot the enemy. Are they not soldiers? I dare somebody this, because this is the Army. They're only teamsters and cooks. That's the argument I hear. I say, great. So a truck driver, a teamster in the U.S. Army today, wears the same uniform, has U.S. Army over his name, over his jacket pocket, and he gets paid the same as an infantry soldier. Is he not a soldier? Well, how about the cook in the 82nd Airborne? Call him not a soldier, and he'll kick your butt. So, you know, that's a lame argument. They're soldiers. They're doing different kinds of duties. Maybe they're not carrying a musket, but there's plenty of evidence that a lot of them carried muskets. If you've seen the movie Gettysburg, it shows a British colonel based on fact. The guy that they pick is a little wimpy guy. The real colonel that was from the British Army was 6.5 feet tall. He looked like a bear. He was in the Guards Regiment, which means you had to be over 6 feet. He was a huge guy, but he wrote in his book on visiting the Confederacy about a black Confederate soldier leading prisoners to the rear at Gettysburg with no other white soldiers with him. He said, the abolitionists would be horrified because of what was going on.
Absolutely. Well, we got about 30 seconds here. Tell folks where they can find you guys so they can help defend Arlington, continue this righteous struggle.
Thank you for bringing that up. Yes, sir. www.defendarlington.org. www.defendarlington.org. So if you go to that, there's lots of information in there. We have articles, publications that have been put out. We sell stuff to raise funds, like the UDC ladies to build the memorials. Now we're raising funds to defend the memorials against the desecration.
Well, sir, thank you very much. Thanks for coming on today. Thanks for your service. And I'm going to have Ed back to talk on a show about how he was fired due to wokeism from his job as a professor of history at the Army Command and General Staff College. We'll see you tomorrow. It's Training Tuesday here on Worldview Tube.
Hello, I'm Brandon House. I want to thank you